Do I really have to do cardio?
No.
How do we know if I'm overtraining?
Okay, ready?
Should I cut weight for this competition?
How much protein am I supposed to always?
Is it ironic that a podcast about Strongman is hosted by a woman?
I think that's kind of the point.
Welcome back to Lift and Load. Lifting is one part art and one part science. So we wanted to talk to the guy who wrote the script on both. Nick Shaw, founder and CEO of RP Strength, joins us this week to talk about all aspects of training, whether you're a beginner, a little more experienced, or the truly elite. This one has a little bit for everyone. So get ready, because it's time to lock in, lift heavy, load up, let's talk training.
And we're live. All right. So first up, Nick, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Lift and Load.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me on. Great to be here.
And I actually don't know if you're mobile in your setup right now, but we had a bet and you do owe me 10 push-ups.
Yeah, I mean, I won't be on camera. Do you trust me to do them? Because I was like, well, it's not going to be.
I trust you completely.
Well, I got to take my headset off and I'll knock out 10 push-ups. In the meantime, do you want to fill people in on the bet while I do them?
I absolutely will. So Nick and I are chatting. I know. Listen, I was going to make sure he did this. So Nick and I were talking. Oh, this was before, Bills and Lions played. So I have married into a Buffalo Bills family. Nick is from the Detroit area and he is a Lions fan. So despite the fact that he currently lives in North Carolina, and I was like, winner's got to do 20 push-ups on our episode. And he's like, how about 10? I'm like, 10 sounds better.
20, I might be out of breath. 10 is manageable. It's kind of like a warm-up. Yeah.
And so I can now say that I made Nick Shaw do 10 push-ups for a bet. The Lions, honestly, I'm watching that game and I'm laughing and I'm trolling on Instagram. And there was a moment where they started to come back and I was like, oh, crap. I was like, I have posted that this is a good thing for me. And I'm like, Bills, don't let me down, dude.
That's a fear.
Yeah, there's another guy at a gym that I go to that made a bet with me on that game too. Like I don't ever bet on sports because one, the teams that I'm deeply passionate about, I would lose so much money and or sleep and or go insane. But he was gonna have me wear a Bills jersey at the gym and he just forgot to bring it. So I was like, well, hey, I went up to him. I'm like, hey man, whatever, I'll throw it on. I'll do a set, whatever. It makes it seem like I don't like the Bills. I'm like, I don't have anything against the Bills. Like, it's not quite like the Lions because the Lions are literally the lovable losers and they've never won anything of importance, especially in my lifetime. But, hey, at least the Bills have made a few Super Bowls, but it's like.
They've made it. It's
not won it,
repeatedly
but
made it.
Yeah.
It's been
better
a rough
than
time
not
there.
ever having made it, I suppose, which is the Lions' case. They've never made it, so.
And I have zero beef with the Lions. It was just so perfect at that timing. I was like, we can make this fun. And I don't bet on sports because I went to UF. I'm a Gator. It's been a rough time in college sports. I'm, Bills fan, so I have zero room to talk. But it was fun. So thank you. Thanks for goodness Witzbar on that one.
Yeah. Well, we'll pay it up. It's not too bad.
But I want to talk a little bit because you are very well known in the industry. RP Strength is it's a company that I've been following. I've been sharing your memes for years. I've been watching your podcast, and you guys are just a really good source of some raw information. I use the RP Diet app myself, but what brought you to that? Because it is something that has impacted so many people, and it's from everything from diet to hypertrophy now. But what made you start it?
Ooh, yeah. Do you want like the real long story or just like the shortened version?
Is the real long story like 25 minutes?
No. It'd never be that
Then
long.
Long one. Let's do it.
Yeah. So to me, it goes back to high school, and I was always super interested in sports. And I had a brother that was 4 years older than me who I got to see like train for sports and whatnot. And so we had like a real old rickety like weight bench in my parents' basement. So this is, like rural Michigan. We have like a real basement with one of like the really skinny benches with like a bar that probably weighs like 5 pounds, something like that, with sand weights. So far we go back. And it was just really cool. Like I liked it. And then I got into high school and wanted to train for sports. And it just kind of clicked with me. And I was like, yeah, lifting is my jam. I just, was called a gym rat. I was always in the gym. I was always training. I was not particularly athletically gifted in any endeavor, but I was like, hey, I can work harder than most people. So I guess that's, everyone has their thing. And I was like, well, I guess that'll be my thing. So I always loved lifting, always loved fitness. And then I went to school at the University of Michigan. So figured I'd do something sports related. That's where I met Dr. Mike in the student weight room, and he convinced me to do a powerlifting meet. And at the time I wasn't competing in anything. I was just lifting for fun and kind of needed something in terms of like direction to channel that, like, I don't know, love, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, it clicked, man. I started training with Mike all the time. Graduated from Michigan. He was like, hey, you should come out to New York. We can be personal trainers. So I had no idea what I wanted to do after I graduated. And I was like, yeah, fitness. That sounds cool. And so that is where we started training together. We worked at a private training studio in Manhattan, met tons of awesome people, like some of the world's, smartest, wealthiest types of people. It was really, really cool. And we kind of noticed like how we would train people was quite a bit different than how other people would train folks. And, not to like sound arrogant, but we thought like maybe the way we were doing it was maybe better. And then, because Mike had his master's degree, so he had a pretty good idea of like, okay, what works versus what doesn't. This is, I don't know, circa 2010. So it's kind of way different than it is now. Because at least now you look around the space like 15 years later, I think there's a lot more evidence-based practices in fitness versus back then it was more the wild, wild west. And we just thought if we could take some more like evidence-based stuff and start applying it, well, one, we had to kind of test everything on ourselves and then start using on our clients. We thought we could be onto something. And so that was really kind of like the idea and the why behind starting RP, because it was a lot of, if you looked at bodybuilders, especially back then, and we trained at bodybuilding gyms in New York City, tons of huge guys, we would kind of ask them questions, and what they said, we were like, I don't know if that really makes too much sense, but hey, they're like big, jacked people, so they obviously know something. And so the idea was, well, if you can like walk the walk and talk the talk, so like you're an athlete yourself, but you also know a little bit of like science behind things, gee whiz, that kind of seems like the best way to mesh the two. And then you can't really argue with one or the other. Because if you only have one, it's like, so that was the idea to mesh the two of those. And that was the, I guess, origins of RP.
And you have a background in bodybuilding, correct?
Yeah. So I met Dr. Mike at University of Michigan in 2007. The first ever bodybuilding show that I did was in 2008. Mike coached me. I did terribly, but I still, got my feet wet and competed. So,
I mean, define terribly, because I've seen your physique now. You're a monster. So are we talking like last place or what happened?
Second to last place. I think there was like maybe 9
That's
people in my
terrible.
group. I did. Yes. I'm really terrible. No, I'm
That's
happy to own it
terrible.
too. So here's the thing though, because like, and this is, pretty important to coaching, I would feel like too, because you kind of have to experiment and mess around like on yourself and maybe some close friends or whatever. And we didn't know anything about competing in bodybuilding at the time. And so like, I remember like, a week before the show, I thought I looked pretty good, or at least, relatively speaking. And then, you did the whole like carb up thing, the week before, and then I look worse on stage. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that's, crappy way to learn some lessons. But it took a couple times around to, start to figure things out a little bit. And, here we are 15 years later. Hopefully we know a little bit more stuff than we did then.
Right. Well, you just earned your pro card too. A couple years ago, right?
Yes, July of 2023. Yep.
And that is something that, as a business owner and as an athlete, because bodybuilding is freaking hard. It's the reason why I don't do it. I mean, it is such a scientific level of precision that you have to do to get the perfect look on a day at a time you're realistically at your weakest, and you have to look your strongest.
Yeah.
And so that is so impressive, truly.
Yeah. Bodybuilding is really unique because, you quote unquote look your best, but you absolutely feel your worst. And yeah, you're definitely not training for performance at that standpoint. So it is pretty different. And bodybuilding is really interesting. Whether or not you want to call it a sport, I don't really care. But it is super hard because it's 24/7. If you are competing as a pro athlete, let's say, I don't know, NBA, NFL, whatever. Like, you get done with your game, you're probably monitoring your nutrition a little bit, or hopefully you are a little bit, but you can kind of go eat whatever you want for the most part. Where it's like, you get done training, it's like, oh, I'm going to go home and eat exactly what I need to in specific amounts. And so it's very hard in that sense. You don't necessarily need to be particularly talented, I suppose. Genetics plays a huge role, but that's a little bit different than like, are you 6'10" and can dunk a basketball? So, well,
Yeah, that's a little. Do you have any sports that I'd say more conventionally athletic sports like the running and the jumping that you would go to if you weren't doing bodybuilding? Because I definitely saw something you were talking about rowing once. And that's a lot of what, so I row, I'm a rowing coach, and it's freaking hard. It's using all the muscles. Like, would you
Yeah.
do that? Like, if you weren't on stage and running a business, what would you do?
It's a good question. I mean, I was a runner in high school, but I just don't really love running. I tried jujitsu. Jujitsu is fine. I trained for a couple of years, got my blue belt, and then decided that because what I figured out was I was trying to do a little bit of like bodybuilding style training and jujitsu, and it's just like I can't do both. Very hard to do
Right.
both, and especially if you want to be really good at one or the other, you kind of have to really specialize. I didn't love it though. I just love training, so I don't know if I would really compete in a sport per se. I would just keep lifting, I guess, quote unquote, for fun. But I just love training with weights, and I always have. I started lifting when I was like 13, and I'm 37 now, so almost 25 years.
Just happens. You know, that makes you a stereotypical blue belt, right? They say that about all blue belts. You get your blue belt and you quit. I say that as a blue belt that stopped because I went from jujitsu and Muay Thai to rowing, and it just happened to be at the blue belt time. So the amount of memes I got from friends was brutal.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I like jujitsu and all that. The best way to phrase it is I didn't love it.
Yeah, I feel that.
And it was kind of one of those things where like, yeah, I would show up and I wanted, like my son was in it for a while and I helped coach some of the kids' classes and all that. So I was like pretty into it for a while, but it just can't compare to just weight training. And I mean, who knows? I don't know if I'll ever compete again. Probably won't, but it's just really hard to do both. And I love weight training. There's days where I wake up in the morning, I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I can't wait to go train. I couldn't really ever say that about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, there's something pretty cool about picking things up and putting them back down repeatedly. It's so cathartic.
Yeah.
I dig it.
Yeah.
So you've been exposed to the industry for a while. You've been in it. You've lived it from both the outside on the business and as an athlete. What have you seen? Because it's changed a lot. Trends come and go. And full disclosure, Lift and Load started because there's so much crap out there.
Yeah.
There are a million videos, a million micro influencers are now apparently a thing. I don't even know what that means. And you've got influencers, you've got all these people saying they know what people should do. And so information as a result is everywhere.
Yeah, what have we seen? So when I guess RP started in 2010, 2011, something like that. Man, at the time it was like kind of low carb was king. Paleo, especially like dabbling in the CrossFit world. Paleo is everything everywhere. And I feel like we've been around long enough now, and maybe we helped influence kind of kick paleo to the curb. But everyone was like, oh, you can only eat like sweet potatoes, right? And we're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, you can eat all this other stuff. And then people started doing it and they're like, oh, holy crap. Like we perform way better. And it's like, yes, there we go. Now we're on to something. So like that for me was a big one. I mentioned this earlier, but I 100% hear you. And like everyone sort of has a voice and opinion and all that stuff. And there is tons of garbage out there. But I would say from where things were, like let's call it 2010 to 2025 now, man, I feel like at least there is a lot more better information out there. Whereas 15 years ago, it was just like all kind of crap information. Like very few people that were like, hey, why don't we actually see like what the science says and try to start to steer things in that particular direction? So at least, yeah, I would say that those two are a couple things that really stick out to me.
It helps, I think, that you're a big source of the good information. Again, it's the stuff you and Mike put out there, solid, man. It really is.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Mike has definitely blown up the last year and a half, and it's really cool to see that on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say YouTube's the biggest for you guys? Because I see his bald head all over TikTok.
Yes, but it's all clips of YouTube. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, YouTube, Instagram, then probably TikTok.
Now, do you follow your own app as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that was like, to me, that's the coolest part of marketing RP stuff now is like, I use it every single day. So does Mike, so does Jared. So it's like not marketing. It's just like, hey, this is what we do every single day. Like there's nothing fabricated about it. It's just, this is what we do. This is why we made it. I've been using the Hypertrophy app now for probably about 2 years. So we tested it for a while ourselves. It launched May of 2023. Here we are a year and a half later. Every single maybe like sometimes I'll be on a deload or traveling or something. I'll do a super easy workout that like I don't feel I need to pull up the app and like change stuff. But like every actual training session, I've used our RP hypertrophy app for like 2 years now. Absolutely,
Oh wow, that's great. I know you were talking
100%.
about it earlier about the RP diet app that Christina and I actually both use too.
Awesome,
It
thank you.
has worked so much when we are competing,
Uh,
especially. I've worked with other nutrition coaches, and I found like the RP app works better sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one, thank you so much for using it, both of you.
Hmm.
Two, yeah, the only thing, so, I use a diet app. I also have, I guess, just been doing the RP lifestyle now for like 15 years myself. So I kind of just have a pretty good intuitive understanding. And I don't mean intuitive eating. I mean, if you were to ask me like, hey, what are your macros for your next meal? I'd be like, oh, that's easy. The guy could tell you.
Hmm.
Um, Probably 6 o'clock, not too long after the podcast is over. Yeah, probably go have like 35 grams of protein, probably about 15 grams of fat, and something like 50 grams of carbs. And then again at like 9 o'clock or so, I usually do like a 42-gram Fairlife. So there's 40 and probably
Oh,
something
it's
that's
so
like,
yummy. I live
yeah,
off of
like,
those.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
so good.
I mean, Fairlife's amazing. Shout out. I wish I could get a hold of them. I'd love to, uh, set something up with them, but they're owned by Coke, so they're apparently impossible to get a hold of. But
Gotcha.
yeah, no, it's just like all this information's here. I use it every single day, and yeah, probably some big changes coming to the diet app that'll make it a little bit more flexible. I think the diet app is good right now. It's close to being great, and some of the changes that we have coming up will allow like more flexibility. So this is a really cool thing. But so the Diet Coach app came first. And then we had that out for a few years. And then we had the Hypertrophy app. And so the Hypertrophy app day one had the benefit of everything we learned from the Diet app. Cause like people kind of like the RP structure of stuff, sure. But like, as you both know, I'm sure things happen on the fly. You need to be able to change stuff, move stuff around, whatever it is. And so the Hypertrophy app, you can do that in everything. Like you need to swap out an exercise, you're at a gym, someone else is using that machine, whatever it is, boom, couple clicks, like 2 seconds, you're done. You can create your own stuff. You can use some of our templates and all that. So we're trying to make the diet app, a little bit more flexible in that regard. So it's a little bit easier to kind of, hey, here's our recommendations. Cool. If you just want to do this, you can awesome. You'll get great results. But, hey, people like to move stuff around. Nutrition tends to be a little more like finicky with stuff, and people tend to have, I guess, more preconceived notions around it. So they like to be able to do a little bit more of their own stuff. So.
And I think a lot of that, because I had the same reaction with the diet app. I had to learn how to use it. And once I learned
100%.
how to use it, it worked for me. But I had spent, and I'm also a nutrition coach, and don't do my own nutrition because you're most likely to cheat yourself. Like I'm 100% coaches need coaches. Doesn't matter what you're doing because there's nothing worse than waking up and like logicking your way out of not doing what you're
Oh,
supposed to
yeah.
do. And I had done my fitness pal for years because it
Hmm.
was there. It was a big resource. Like I'm talking since,
Yeah.
oh God, what, like 20, like 10, since I was using that, I was used to plugging in I had premium. I used my macros. I plugged it all in and I go to the RP diet app and I'm like, I have to plan.
Yeah.
I don't do planning well. And that was my problem. Right. And so, but once I figured that out, oh man, it helped.
100% spot on. So that is really the big difference because and I guess we're trying to make it, because right now it's purely a planner. It's really a coach. And, you wouldn't have a coach tell you what to do and then kind of ignore it and then come back and try to like fill in the gaps later. You're like, no, no, no. Coach gives you a plan. Like that's the plan that you follow. So it does require a bit more, rigidness, I would say. Whereas what we're going to try to make it do is not like just, MyFitnessPal, but the ability to move stuff around and or customize some of your own stuff in the app a little bit easier. That's kind of the area it's trying to go towards.
Well, I'm pumped. So is there any idea of when that's happening? Can we share with the people? Or will your marketing team kill you?
I have stuck my own foot in my own mouth so many times from like trying to give rough timelines over, I don't know, 6-7 years now we've had apps that it's like, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 17 times. Like I'm just going to shut the hell up. So this year I feel very confident in saying in 2025 when that's what we have meetings about next week to start to try to flesh that out a little bit. But I will say there is like an alpha build out there that's probably being used by about 20 or so people, kind of just testing it out and all that. So that's been happening for a while. And then we'll probably get it out there. Sort of like what we did with Hypertrophy app is probably open it up to some folks who use it for, I don't know, a month or two. And then once we feel pretty good with that, then you'll probably release it out for like, anyone can go and do.
Nice.
great.
And for
That's
everyone listening, we will put a link to both the apps in this because the hypertrophy is available and good to go. Or
Yep.
then we'll put so people can check it out. I personally follow programming for Strongman, so hypertrophy is a little different for me. It's part of my programming, but the diet again, it's full endorsement. It's my go-to. So we'll make sure we include that in the links.
Thank you. I have a question. You said you mentioned using a coach. Do you use a coach year round for nutrition, or like do you just do it when you're kind of getting ready for a competition?
I use it year round now.
Yeah.
At first, I was just doing when I was in prep for competition, but after comp, I would fall off to the point where I couldn't handle my diet on my own.
Sure.
So I
Totally.
had to jump back on.
And I was doing little bit with working with nutrition coaches. I could do all my own maintenance stuff. When I started getting really serious about weight class cutting, staying within really getting strength while maintaining a good body comp was my thing. Because when I did fight sports, easy. You were doing 5 hours of cardio a day, you're boxing, you're rolling, you're doing all this. That was very easy for me to manage my nutrition. Trying to become strong and stay a certain size was very difficult for me. That's when I started using the app.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because, like if I do a contest prep or like a pretty serious cut for whatever reason, I turn it over to Jared. So Jared Feather, he's one of our coaches, because I'm totally with you. It's like, I just want the plan, and you give me a plan to follow. I have no problems executing it, but I don't want to be in the case where like I can probably talk myself into a number of things. Like I'd rather just have, it's sometimes easier. You just outsource that and you're like, oh, I don't have to think about it. Actually, it's their job to think about it for me.
Oh, it's great. You need every bit of mental energy you can when you're about to compete. Like, just tell me what to do. I'll do it. And sometimes, have you found that when you're doing your own programming, even with nutrition, are you harder on yourself? Because I'll do that. There's two sides of that coin. Sometimes people become unrealistic, and other times I think they're too lenient.
Yeah, it probably depends. So I wouldn't do it during a contest prep because, like I said, I could convince myself into either way. I could probably convince myself to be too hard on myself, or I could be like, yeah, you know what? Hey, treat yourself, Nick. Treat yourself. You've been doing a good job. So to me, I'd rather just turn it over to Jared. The only thing that I would say is, he would say, hey, here's kind of your step count that you should be aiming for. I almost always would go over that a little bit. And I feel like that's probably fairly common in bodybuilding. And then like, once we got to a few weeks out and I was like, oh, okay, we're going to bump up the timeline a little bit. Jared was like, hey, I wouldn't go over this amount. And I'd just be like, yeah, I'm going to go over that. Because it's like this, at that point, you're like, listen, we're moving up the timeline a little bit. This is my shot. I'm not going to not put in my best effort. So my best effort in my head was, okay, I'm going to do everything that's listed, just cardio wise. Training wise, no, that I understand. But, it's just walking. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to get in like 2,000 extra steps. No big deal.
It's totally fine.
It's not fatiguing me.
I love that you said that because we have a lot of people who listen and we've talked to that are very new in their fitness journey. So we've got a really cool mix where we have professional athletes and we have people trying to get fit for the first time and they're retired, 50s, 60s, whatever. And everyone's heard step count, right? It's the Fitbit made that huge. And so people know track your steps, the 10,000 steps, 12,000, whatever it is. It's really neat hearing you say you're watching your step count because you are arguably on the elite side of the spectrum and you are still like, no, I just got to walk. Walking is everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So the interesting thing with like set particular cardio sessions is because I've done it both. I remember the second ever bodybuilding show that I did, I was living in New York and I would sometimes get up to, especially towards the end, like 2 1-hour sessions a day, which by the way is terrible, brutal, awful, would not recommend it. But then the problem is you sort of put all of your effort into those cardio sessions. And then like the rest of the day, you're just sitting around. So you're not moving. And so if you just have something like this will always tell you the truth, truth relatively speaking. And if you're at 5,000 steps and you got to be at 10 or 12 or 14, whatever it is, you're like, oh, holy crap, I'm way behind. So that's why I'm a pretty big fan of just doing that because it sort of forces you it won't let you sit around too much. And sometimes people can get misled by, oh, well, I just did a 30-minute cardio session. okay, well, like, I have no idea how many steps you got in or anything like that. And now you're just sitting around the rest of the day. So it's like your step count might actually only end up being 6,000 for the day versus if you have a goal you're aiming for and that's 10, 12, whatever it is, like you have to keep moving in order to get that. And so like you're just always, burning calories. It's just easier. I guess it's more reliable is how I would phrase it.
Yeah, and there's really a lot of misinformation about, oh, I'm going to go high intensity, burn a ton of calories. A billion gyms advertise that, right? Come burn X amount of calories in X amount of minutes. Here's the funny thing. I own a gym that does that, but it has strength and conditioning as well.
Yeah.
Because the muscle component is where a lot of people go wrong. They go, let me just burn some calories and then go eat a burger. And so you want to have constant movement. You want to make sure you build up your skeletal muscle mass. You want to just be consistent. Consistency at a low intensity is huge. And actually, I think you just shared something about that the other day, I think, or RP did about, consistency over 365. I saw you post that.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, that's the secret. People, especially starting out, they tend to bite off more than they can chew. So they'll be like, oh, hey, I haven't been into fitness for a little bit. Oh, it's New Year's now. So I'm going to go gangbusters and go all in. And you're like, okay. Well, if you do that, you're probably going to burn out after a month. Like, why don't you just bite off something you can chew? Like you said, if we want to use step count, for example, if you're someone that's used to 5,000 steps a day, you're like, yeah, I'm all in. Now it's time to bump it up to like 10 or 12 or something. People always want to like overshoot it. It's like, why? It'll go from like 5 to 7, maybe 8, something like that. But that way it's a little bit more realistic. When people make these crazy jumps and these crazy goals, you're almost like, why does that go from 0 to 100? Why don't you go like 0 to 50 and just like ease your way in? And that way you get some momentum building, like you get used to it. You're like, oh, this isn't too bad. Like there's always time later on to do more, but maybe don't start with the crazy stuff.
And we're humans. It's more fun. Full send.
It's a feeling thing. Yeah, it's a feeling thing. It feels cool to do that, and like there's a bunch of people out there like everyone sort of looks up to, even though they're like the extreme outliers. And that, I mean, like the David Goggins types, which, listen, right. I love some David Goggins too. Like he's the man, but if you take someone that's like not working out at all and like they jump into that, you're like, I feel like there's probably a middle ground. You don't have to go from way over here to way over here. It's like, it's not even the middle, right? For someone like us, like, well, hey, let's just jump in and get your feet wet a little bit versus, thinking you have to like, exactly.
So aside from the apps, do you do any personal training or coaching?
So I stopped training people in person in like 2015 when I moved from New York down to Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I live now. So I haven't done that in a while. I used to coach people. I currently have one client, and that's just because it's like the guy. I've seen him around. I know he's kind of a no BS type person. That's the only person that I really coach. But I probably started giving up coaching around maybe like before COVID, something like that. But probably in my time, I've coached a decent number of folks.
Do you notice any particular difference between, I'd say, I'll call it virtual coaching of RP strength and then in person? Like, do you think, because people are always trying to find some secret to being coach or fitness, do you think there's one benefit of one over the other?
I didn't love training people in person because it would just be more like general population folks that weren't as serious about it. I do remember training one powerlifting lady. She worked at a hedge fund. She was also a very good powerlifter. I think she was in the 48 kilo class back then. I think it was, still 48 in USAPL. Now she was serious as heck. So it was fun training her. So for me, training people remotely was better and more fun because you're basically self-selecting into someone that like is probably fairly serious about it because you're hiring a coach online. Versus in person, you probably need a little bit more hand holding. And listen, there's people that are really great with training folks like that. Whatever is not a passion of mine. My passion was always working with people that are always a little bit more serious about it.
It's always more fun. Well, I'm actually glad you said that because that segues me into a section that I think could be kind of fun. So I told you we might be doing this. So we want to do like a rapid fire almost. So
I love rapid fires.
It's so much easier. So
so fun.
We've got a beginner. We'll call him lifter, beginner athlete, intermediate. So maybe like they've been doing stuff for like 3 to 5 years, right? They know a little bit. And then you've got a truly like elite person, right? Or like that power lifter, someone that's just a beast. So we'll have a series of questions. I'm going to pull these up for you. And what would you say to each of those people and are there changes, right? So, first one, what would you say are the ideal splits in programming for a beginner, an intermediate, and an advanced?
For trying to get like better body comp,
Yep.
something like that. Okay,
Yeah.
so beginner can probably lift like 2, maybe 3 times a week, and the sessions can probably be like 30 to 45 minutes. So you kind of just want to get people moving. You just want to get people going. Probably lots of just like compound basics, maybe even supersetted with one another. So you could do, like a lower body thing and an upper body thing, and you can kind of just blast out full body in probably like 30 minutes, realistically, a couple times a week. And they're going to notice big changes just from that. So like, that's the cool part when you're a beginner, like you don't have to do anything crazy. And I think sometimes that's overlooked. Intermediate, you're probably in the gym, that's 3 to 4 times a week, probably starting to get a little bit more advanced and maybe like an upper lower type split where like you just do upper body one day, just do lower the next, et cetera, et cetera. And then for advanced, so advanced is where it really starts to get fun because you're probably training with weights 5 to 10 times a week. Me personally, I train like 6 times a week, so I feel like you could do that. So basically like a push-pull leg split. So push-pull legs, something like that. That's pretty cool. So there's definitely modifications to be made along the way.
Nice. All right. Next one. If you have one piece of nutritional advice, and that can be supplements or nutrition for each of those categories.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned supplements because, like, if you're a beginner, you don't really even need supplements. Intermediate, yeah, okay, maybe. But it's like you basically just start with the basics, master those. So for a beginner, I'd be like, all right, cool. How many times are you eating a day now? They're like 1, 2, maybe, right? Whatever. You're like, okay, cool. Each meal, you're just going to start with some protein. Like, just try to hit this number of protein per day. The rest is kind of all gravy after that. Intermediate, you can probably start getting a little bit more advanced in terms of like meal times. Like, hey, cool, you're going to eat 4 times a day, meal 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And then for advanced, yeah, you can go, well, obviously more advanced with nutrient timing, throwing in some supplements, supplementing with, let's say whey and carbs around training. Cause if you're more advanced, you're probably training harder and longer. So you can benefit from something like that. But for beginner intermediate, it's like, no, don't even worry about that stuff. Like just focus on getting in your protein. Maybe for intermediate, it's like, hey, here's some rough kind of macro goals to aim for. And then advanced, it's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go all in. Here's what the plan's going to look like. Here's the timings. Here's the amounts. Cool. Now we start adding in some more advanced stuff.
All right. So same groups. Let's imagine that they're an average current body composition. How do you integrate cardio?
Beginner, I would start with just really easy step count goals because they're probably not doing anything before. So it's just like, hey, cool, aim for 5, 6K steps a day. Just so you're like just moving around a little bit on top of the 2 times a week lifting sessions. But if you're doing supersets back and forth, like compound basic supersets, you're getting the cardio in there too. So I wouldn't worry about it a ton. As you move up to intermediate, you can probably start adding in some like dedicated cardio depending on the goals, right? So if they're like, really just want like hypertrophy, okay, cool. Now, like, here's your step goal. Here's the 8 or 10K every day you want to aim for. And then for the advanced person, it would probably be something along the lines of like, it's pretty much mandatory that you got to hit, 10, 12K steps a day on top of your lifting. And really it just depends. Like if you're doing dedicated cardio sessions based on what their goal is, like if they're more of an athlete, yeah, you can get into higher intensity style training. But if they're like bodybuilder hypertrophy, you're like, nope, we're still not doing high intensity cardio. It's still just getting in step count, but you got to be pretty religious about it.
And last one is, let me see. So you kind of touched on this. If you have, because we talked about supplements already, what are 3 supplements that you think each group has to have?
One of the ones is probably going to be, even though I said beginners don't need it, a lot of times if you're like, hey, you need to get, I don't know, let's say you got a 150-pound female, like try to get somewhere near 120, 150 grams of protein a day. And then for a beginner, they're not used to that. It's going to be very hard for them to get in the protein amount. So even though it's not necessary for beginners, you could add in something like a whey protein or like an RTD shake. Generally, they're just whey protein. Pretty easy. So I think that's across the board for beginner, intermediate, or advanced. You can all benefit from that. Number 2, creatine monohydrate's been around. It's pretty tried and true. There's no real like arguments against it at this point. Three, I'll maybe give some different answers here. So for a beginner, maybe benefit from like a multivitamin or something like that because they're probably not eating tons of fruits and veggies. Cool. Someone in the intermediate range, I don't know, maybe some like caffeine or something to help with their workouts, give them a little more energy. Advanced, you could maybe use casein protein at night before bed and or some workout carbohydrates like some Gatorade or something like that. Because in those longer weight training sessions, you might start to get a little bit impacted, fatigued towards the end. So something like that, I would only recommend for someone that's more advanced.
And I'm glad you say that because a lot of people probably listened to it. They said Gatorade's a supplement and they don't realize that carb-based drinks are, because I know
Yeah.
people that drink it for like water and I'm like, you're not sweating. You're not doing anything. You're just drinking sugar and salt at that point. But
Yeah.
for people who like, I prescribe this, I coach a lot of youth rowers. We talked about when to get in carbs, when to get in the electrolytes, and when you really want to get quick sugars, easy to digest, and you drink them. And it's fantastic when you're about to do a quick burst of energy. But it is technically a supplementation to a diet. It's not just
Yeah,
casual beverage.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a time and place for it. Yeah, if you're someone that's not very active, there's no reason to sit around drinking sugary beverages.
I know some people that will drink a soda and then go work out because they just want the sugar for it, which is just a whole stress thing for me, but because there's a lot in there. But it works really well. Some people have quirks. There's some old school lifters that I've met that are 70s that do some weird things. They'll eat and drink. They'll like slam candy and then go lift. They'll go have a beer afterwards for their carbs. It's like, you do you, man.
Oh, a beer.
Oh yeah, I've seen
I never heard
weird.
that before.
Yeah.
Well, what's really funny? So, CrossFit's really big on, paleo and generally speaking, lower carbs. But then these are the same people that are like crushing beer all the time. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
I have been drank under the table by more CrossFitters than I care to admit. They
100%.
they'll do runs for it too.
Yep.
They'll like do like a WOD that'll be like beer, 400-meter sprint beer, and I'm like, ugh.
But you drink like a Diet Coke in front of them. They're like, oh, that's terrible. That's poison. You're like, the fuck are you talking about? You're literally drinking alcohol. Like alcohol is poison. You're like, good.
Ask your liver. It doesn't like it.
For sure.
I know you talk about this a lot on your podcast as well, but I have many people that always ask me, pound for pound, what is the amount of protein that you should be intaking every day?
Yeah. Just talked about that pretty recently. So again, you could almost do this. The beginner, intermediate, advanced. Like, okay, you're a beginner. You're probably you have no idea how much protein you eat. Cool. Hey, aim for like 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. So 200-pound person, that's 160 grams. If you want to really keep it simple for math, go 150. And they're going to see lots of benefits just from that. Intermediate, you can be like, okay, cool. We're probably going to be in the 0.8 to like 1 gram per pound of body weight. So 200-pound person, somewhere in the 160 to 200 gram range. Again, is there some nuance here? Yes. If you're someone that has higher body fat percentage, you can use these same numbers, but just go off of your lean body mass. And then as you get maybe more advanced, there are times and arguments to be made that you can go over 1 gram per pound. But for us, as you're more advanced, you're probably on the leaner side, probably have more muscle. It's totally fair and reasonable in terms of simplicity to just make 1 gram per pound of body weight. And to me, like, that's a pretty simple and easy approach. Probably not going to get a ton of arguments out there from it. Especially from people who've been around the block for a while and like compete themselves. The only people you might get some arguments from are probably like the 22-year-old male that like has maybe been lifting for a little bit and it's never really like competed, doesn't have that much muscle. And like, well, actually I read one PubMed study and you're like, cool, that's awesome.
That's
but like,
cool, bro.
Like I've been lifting longer than you've been alive. So you have to, evidence base is taking, generally speaking, what science has to say. It's going to point us in a direction. It doesn't give us set, precise answers, but like, hey, this is probably a good route to take. And then you have to take real world application and then you have to combine the two. And like, that's kind of where the magic is made. So, the protein one's a really interesting one, but like
talked about a lot too.
1 gram per pound of body weight is probably a pretty good start. Like for most people, because like if you take that, like let's say you can go over. Okay, cool, you can go over. And then we use 0.8 and it's like, well, what if we take the average? Where do we end up? Gee whiz, right around 1 gram per pound of body weight. Like it's,
Don't do the extra math.
yeah, you're certainly not under eating if you're at that point. Like, again, there's an argument to be made you might be able to go over, but I would say that's probably more for like intermediate and advanced people.
I did have a question. It's more of a personal question, and so like Christy and I, well, for me, dating a high level athlete comes with a lot of sacrifices and things like that. How do you balance out being a professional bodybuilder in your life?
Yeah, really good question. So when I first started competing, I was not very good at it at all. And actually, after I did my second show, this is like 2013 in New York, and New York City is a super competitive bodybuilding area. So I had a son at the time. He was born in 2012, so he was only like a year. And then when I had my daughter, she was born in 2014. So March of 2014, I basically made the trade-off. I was like, okay. Well, don't want to be like a deadbeat dad. That's probably not great. I'm probably not going to be like bodybuilding is going to cost me money to compete. And I'm like, okay, that one's probably negotiable. 3, hey, this RP thing that we got going on, it's not doing too bad. It's starting to do well. And I'm like, this one's actually going to like provide for family, do some cool stuff. You don't want to be a deadbeat dad. Okay, those are probably 2 good options. Something kind of has to go. And I was like, you know what? The competing thing can probably go. It's not, I never stopped lifting, but how I viewed it was if you want to be an actual competitive bodybuilder, like it's a full-time job.
Yes.
A parent, full-time job, running RP, full-time job. I'm like, you can't work 3 full-time jobs. 2, I can see the argument for 2. And so something had to go. And so that was a trade-off that I made. And so the last time, so I competed twice since then, with the most recent one coming in 2022. So there was something like a 9-year gap in between. And it wasn't until we had enough people like to help run the operations and back end and all that stuff of RP, where we had a really good team around, that I was then able to take some of that energy that went into like the startup phase of RP and shift it back into like, hey, I've maybe got a little bit more time. And, now that we're shifting more into the hypertrophy crowd a little bit, it actually kind of makes sense for me to get back into it and dabble. And so, I was able to do that. So that is kind of how I navigated that of, I don't know how one would try to do all that at once, like something trade-offs. You have to pick and choose. Yeah. Something has to give.
It's great if that's something that gives, doesn't really hurt you, and the things you keep complement each other, right? Like still doing something you love, still providing for your family, and honestly still staying in shape, because a lot of people just go, you kept lifting. A lot of people just stop.
Dive off.
And that's where it's really, really hard.
Yeah, I always love lifting, but I was like, there's a difference between, training just hypertrophy style and like being in good shape versus going to that next level of trying to compete on like a competitive physique bodybuilding stage. And I just knew that trade-off at the time wasn't worth it. And, you'd have to get my wife on here to probably mention what I was like during the last, few weeks of a contest prep. She'd probably be like, no, yeah, it's not that great to be around. Listen, I'd be the first to admit that.
I get it.
Oh yeah.
People ask me about bodybuilding. Mike and I are probably not super great, promoters of bodybuilding, because we're like, yeah, it's terrible. Like, yeah, most people shouldn't do it. You've got to be kind of messed up in the head to want to do it, of which I'll, yeah, totally. Hey, messed up here in the head for sure. But it's like a spirit energy thing where you're like, yeah, you just got to do it because, I mean, I guess for me personally, like I like to do it just because I know that not that many people can do it. So it's just like there's that element of it. But it's not a very good family-oriented sport.
I feel like in order to get that level of physical perceived perfection, you kind of have to be a little selfish. You have to give everything to your training. You got to give everything to your nutrition. And there is no one pleasant when they're dehydrated. So
the dehydrated for sure, which combat sports, strengths, weight class sports, you get that at the tail end for sure. Tends to be just at the very end though. I would say like powerlifting, maybe even strongman. It depends on how severe you have to cut, but like bodybuilding is the extreme of all that. And so what happens is basically like the last month, you're essentially running on fumes. You don't want to be around anyone for the most part. You're not a pleasant person to be around. All you think about is food. All you think about is training. It's just not great from like a family standpoint. And like on the physique, I'm sorry, not physique, but on like the strength sports side, you get some elements of that, but it tends to just be much more short lived, right? Because if you got to do a cut for, weight class for fight sports, this last, I don't know, week or so, let's call it, the last few days, for sure, not pleasant to be around. Now amplify that by like several weeks for bodybuilding. Like that's kind of what you're looking at there. So that's like,
That's terrifying.
No, it's why I don't do it. It's terrible.
Right.
Like I respect them so much, but I love food and I love picking up heavy things and putting them back down and not wanting to die. So that's where I'm going to keep picking up stones and logs. I'm good with that. Actually, most bodybuilder I've talked to, they're like, this sucks. Like this is absolutely terrible, but I'm pretty. And so what can you do?
yeah, like I like doing it because most people can't. I don't know. It's weird.
That's
I know,
cool.
but yeah.
Good feeling to have, though.
Real quick on that note. So when you compete and you do all that work and then you place terribly, it's awful. You're like, this was terrible. This was stupid. And then I took that like 9-year break and then I came back. And so Jared coached me and oh my God, like, Jared's such a good bodybuilding coach and all that. And then you see the results and the hard work pay off. And you're like, oh, this is why people like doing it. Ah, okay, yes, this is fun. You like walk out there, you get in the lineup, they sort of immediately move you to the middle, which essentially means like you're the person they're comparing everyone to. That was cool. That was fun because it was a local Charlotte show. Like my wife, my brother-in-law, Mike were there, some other people. Like that's cool. That's fun. Yeah, you place dead last after you do all that work. And people are like, why are you doing this to yourself? And I'm like, I don't have a good answer for that.
No, that would be a really cool feeling to be like, hey, you're the standard of the show. Like that means, it was really worth it then.
Yep. That makes it fun.
Thank you so much for all this. I really wanted to touch a little bit on your journey through everything from business, and you have some really incredible opinions and experience for people in the industry. So we are going to give all of your contact information in the description, and by that, socials, YouTubes. We'll make sure that people have access to the podcast. And then, let's stay in touch. This has been fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. Great to be here. Again, thank you so much.